not going to be there unless we do something very, very different. One of the definitions of insanity is you keep doing the same thing over and over again and you think you're going to get different results. We keep electing the same kind of people over and over again. When Congress's approval rating was 20-some-odd%, we re-elected 90% of the people in Congress. Shame on us. We have built this notion that it's an entitlement, that it's part of a career stepping stone. And we take people who serve in local offices, and we put them in county offices, and we put them in state offices, and then we put them in greater state offices, and then we put them in constitutional state offices, and then we say, you're ready to be a congressman. Folks, if you read the requirements in the Constitution of what it takes to be a congressman, it's that you've been a citizen of the United States for 7 years and that you live in the state that you intend to represent. The first phone interview I had last August was with a radio station down in Little Rock. And the lady called and she was very respectful and very friendly. And she said, well, General Scotch, what in your background qualifies you to run for Congress? And I said, the only thing that I need to be is a 7-year citizen of the United States, and I've been a citizen of the United States my entire life, and incidentally, I have a birth certificate and can prove it. But that's what it was intended to be. We need to have term limits. How's that for a concept? And when I approach politicians and ask candidates, where do you stand on term limits? Ask them. And what they'll tell you is, well, if the Founding Fathers wanted term limits, why didn't they write it into the Constitution? Folks, they didn't write it into the Constitution because they couldn't imagine anyone wanting to do it over and over again. They saw it as jury duty. And it wasn't until December of 1855 that any congressman received a regular paycheck. These men left their farms, they left their businesses, they went for a few weeks to Washington, D.C., they did their job, and then they came home and they worked. And now we've elected an elite group of politicians that moves from office to office, and when they're ready to go to Congress, we send them to Congress, and then we leave them there. And they come home, and they bring us this thing called pork. And pork is embodied in a lot of ways, but mostly it's this thing called earmarks. And it's this little trick that they play on us. And in the 12 appropriations bills on the Capitol Hill, they bury these little things. They bury these little features. They bury these little projects. And then they come home to our district, and we read that the University of Arkansas gets $3 million through an earmark, and we cheer and we go, hooray, we got an earmark. And we seem to forget that that same process is replicated in all 435 congressional districts. In the year 2009, there were over 10,000 earmarks. Since 1991, we have spent $290 billion on earmarks. And that has got to stop, and that's why one of the first things I'll do is introduce a rules change to eliminate earmarks. And we have developed this sense that they're entitled to a pay raise and all they've got to do is sit quiet and it just kind of happens. We pay these people $174,000 a year. And that doesn't even talk about expenses. And it is obscene. Well, how's this for a concept? I think the most pressing issue in the United States of America today, aside from the whole general principle of integrity and honesty, but the most pressing and urgent problem we've got is a national budget that has gone crazy. So how about this? How about we introduce a change, an amendment to the Constitution that compensates our congressmen like every other worker in America is compensated based on how good a job they do. And if the budget is 1/2 in deficit, they get 1/2 a paycheck. But we have developed this mindset that when you want to hire a congressman, you don't look for a leader. You don't look for someone that's managed budgets in billions and led tens of thousands of our nation's finest. You look for someone who's a politician. You look for someone who wants to go along and get along. You look for someone who has learned this delicate art of compromise. This delicate art of saying, well, if it's good for my district, can it be good for your district? And we're going to do this. Folks, you never compromise your integrity. You go there and do the right thing, and that's the only thing to do. And I have absolutely no intention of going up there to make nice with anybody. I am going up there to do the work of the people. Now, we can talk about a lot of these symptoms, and they're all symptoms. We can talk about this health care program. We can talk about the privatization that existed before and the socialism that exists today. But at its root is a notion that we are a nation of victims. At its root is a group of people who have decided that they don't need to work. 39% of the people who file federal income tax returns now pay no income tax. By the year 2012, that number will be a majority. Imagine a political environment where over half the people have the political power, but they've got no incentive to control spending. They've got every incentive to grow federal programs and draw out of their programs, and they have no incentive to tell their elected representatives that that needs to stop. We have become an entitlement society. Now, I disagree with our president, bless his heart. I happen to believe that we are still a Christian nation. But this notion of Christian kindness, this notion of Christian charity begins here. It does not begin 2,000 miles away in Washington, D.C. It is not charity. It is not charity when it is seized from you and given to someone else against your will. It is not charity. It is not charity when it is seized from you and given to someone who just chooses not to work. We have an obligation in our communities, in our churches, and even in our homes and families to care for the widow, the orphan, the lame, and the afflicted. We have that obligation and we should live up to that. But we have no government obligation to set up a government that does that. Now, let's get back to my friend with the funny hat, Thomas Paine. And let's talk about what brought us here today in 1776. A lot of people talk about the tea tax. A lot of people talk about the Stamp Act of 1764. And they say that was what did it. That somehow the colonists said, enough taxes. Somehow the colonists said, we're not going to pay any more. But that wasn't it. That act lasted only 2 years. There was instead this thing called the Declaratory Act, which happened across that great ocean. It was a distant government. It was a government that taxed the people too much. It was a government that spent the people's money on things they didn't want it spent on. It was a government that didn't listen to the people. If you're seeing some similarities to today, then you've got it. The Declaratory Act said, and let me read this, Parliament is to bind America in all cases whatsoever. And what that said was that the people over here on this side of the Atlantic Ocean were bound to that government to serve it at whatever whim it had. Folks, when we turn into socialist programs, when we turn to our government, 4 sectors of our economy, and when we think that that is going to expand, we have a declaratory act right here, right now in our United States of America, and we cannot stand it. We have no longer become the bosses of our government. We have become its subjects. And we need to stand and end that today. Now, I don't want anyone walking out of here thinking that I read USA Today. I read it when it shows up at the floor of my hotel room door, because I refuse to give them the dollar that they want for